Cree Nation's press conference today. What we will do in relation to this press conference is that we will have Okimaw Wallace Fox, the Chief of the Onion Lake Cree Nation, open up with some statements around what Onion Lake is doing to combat C27, the First Nations Financial Transparency and Accountability Act. We will then give our media that are here an opportunity to ask a couple questions, if they so do desire. We also have a media contact for any further interviews after this afternoon. His name is Fraser Heathen. His contact information is on the press release that is issued today. So I'd like to again welcome you here into Treaty 6 territory, and we will introduce here Chief Wallace Fox. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome you all to Treaty 6 territory. In the name of our Creator, first of all, we'd like to say that this morning we filed a statement of claim against the federal government in federal court here in Edmonton. And the purpose and the reason for this today, because today is the deadline that the federal government, through the Minister of Indian Affairs, has given an ultimatum, as many of you have seen and read, of non-compliance to C27. We have the Minister of Indian Affairs has been sending threatening letters and withholding our monies over implementation of C27. This has been ongoing for many, many years for many people that are not aware of how the government system is implied and imposed on First Nations people across Canada. Every March of every fiscal year, we are basically forced to enter into a fiscal agreement based on their rules, their policies, and there is no room virtually for any negotiation based on the needs of every First Nation. I've been involved almost 30 years in leadership for our people, and I recall at the outset when I was 21 years old, Indian Affairs came to our nation, and I questioned some of the wording and the documentation of the CFA. At the time, the department officials that were present, I asked them, what happens if we don't comply and don't sign this funding agreement? Basically, the official at that time said, you don't sign, you don't get funding. That was the attitude then. Very straightforward and very abrupt. And since that time, I've been observant and watching the federal government and our people. The housing subsidy at that time is the same as it is today in 2014. It has never increased. The population of our people has increased. There are many things that we have to face as leaders of our people. And thus, this was the ultimate, I guess, stand and position at our nation in consultation with our full council and unanimous support as people that were elected to represent our membership, our citizens within Treaty 6. As such, in the federal process, in any political arena, it's very difficult to get all members of our people to consult with all our people, same as any government system that's in place. So because of the deadlines and the time frames, we decided enough is enough. On behalf of our people, the Cree people of the Lake, the Cree Nation, the statement of claim that was the last step in the long journey to get the federal government to sit and talk with the nations. Again, over the course of the years, there are many processes and many tables that we've sat with the federal government representatives, even going so far as to the United Nations to complain about the racism being interpreted by the state against Indians. This legislation creates a group of people identified by race. Indians, we are not protected by the Privacy Act. Due to this legislative agenda, the Government of Canada, the First Nations have been subject to racial slurs designed to spread hate. The mischaracterization of the monies owed to Indians as taxpayers' monies led to racism against my people. We did not want to go to court, but Canada made the unilateral decision to withhold our monies that are in our capital account. If the government, the Diane minister, is refusing to release our monies unless we comply to this legislation. If the government was a private person, they would be charged by the police. In this case, the ministers think it's okay. Well, it's not okay. This legislation, the underlying agenda for this legislation, for many, many, many years, our people have entered since 1876 into a treaty. This is a Crown First Nation relationship that was entered into good faith, peace and friendship treaty of our ancestors, Makeo and Sigaskuts, that entered into treaty in Fort Pitt in 1876. It took two sovereigns. It only can be sovereign people that enter into a treaty. Our people had the inherent right to this land prior to contact Western civilization. We had and still have that responsibility to the land and the waters, to our people, as our ancestors have done for us. In 1876, when the Crown Representative Alexander Morris came to represent the Crown of England and Great Britain, he stated that these promises made to you by the Crown, the Queen, are over and above what you already have, which was the land, which was the livelihood, which was the governance of our people, the ceremonies, the language, everything was intact at that time. During the deliberations of 1876, our people were not notified or informed at that same time. September 9, 1876 is when the treaty was entered into. And our people were not informed at that time that there was this piece of legislation called the Indian Act. That was passed by Parliament in August of 1876. That was going to eradicate and erode every promise to people that were made by the Crown in Fort Pitt under Treaty 6. No one was told that this legislation was going to deter every single promise that was made at that time. And we can all see and understand and realize what history has done to our people since that time. In 1763, the Royal Proclamation recognized the sovereign relationship the people had over this land. The colonized system that was imposed through the Indian Act and the pass system and the permit system, the residential school, everything that happened to our people changed that very way and that very vision that our ancestors had under that treaty. As one elder had said to me, When we had everything the day before treaty and we have nothing today, do you think our ancestors would have given up everything that they have at that time for what we have today? Our people used to travel across this land, all the way south, which is called the United States, all across Turtle Island as we know it from the traditional perspective. Everything that we had, even the land set aside under reserve for Indian people. And that Royal Proclamation, there is no such thing as a pass in the permit system instituted at that time. That came from the Indian Act. That came from that piece of legislation. All of these, even the public monies today, and what has been, as I understand, the Indian monies is our capital trust monies. That is the revenue derived from the land. Today, the statement of claim names the Governor General of Canada. At the time of treaty, as history, it's recorded in the archives, the Crown's representative is the Governor General. As many of you remember, the Governor General, the predecessor of this, David Johnson, prorogued government and Parliament. They have the authority as the Queen's representative in the Crown, despite the Canadian repatriation of the Constitution of 1982. They still have that authority to maintain that relationship and maintain the honor of the Crown with the treaty that was entered into by our people. And they have neglected to provide the consent, which means anything that's derived from the land, which is the revenue from our own people. We have no recourse, as many First Nations across Canada. If we did not have our own source revenue, we would be in the dire strait of same dire strait as many of our fellow brothers and sisters across Canada. And if we had waited for the federal government to provide those resources that they're supposed to provide, we would still be waiting instead of what we have today. I asked one of my teachers, one of our respected elders, what happened to our people? His father was at the time of treaty. And he said when they created the pass system, our people could no longer hunt outside the reservation. They were basically starved, and they had to rely and walk back into the fort, into the Indian agent, to ask for food. When you look at what is happening with this legislation and the threats by government today, after 130 some odd years, the starvation of our people again is being imposed across Canada, and the threat of withholding funds. We have supplemented many of our services in our delivery of services and programs to our people with our own source funds. We go through an exercise every spring and March within the community hall, providing line-by-line audits. All directors are required to do this, and asking the membership if we could use their funds through a formal resolution and transparency process that we try to do in our community. If the people that said no last year would be no funding for our people, today, if they withhold funding, we have 800 full-time employees in our community. Those people are the ones that we think about, and the children. And if we don't stand up and to correct the wrongs that have been imposed on our people, what will happen 20 to 30 years from today to our people? They don't have the legal right to withhold our trust monies. At the same time, C27 legislation, what they're after is to divide our people, to create that dissension amongst our people. We've disclosed our salaries through our budgeting exercise of Chief and Council, and we don't receive federal government contribution monies for Chief and Council salaries. I have challenged Val Cordes in person with many of our staff present. Unless you can show, the federal government can show how much funding you've provided to our band-owned companies and our businesses. That belongs to our people. That information belongs to the citizens of Onion Lake. And we provide a consolidated audit to our people in the community. It's unqualified audit, which means there's three definitions of an audit. A denial, a qualified audit means for the general public that is listening on live stream. A denial means there's a lot of problems and concerns in financial reporting and administration. A denial, a qualified audit means you need to bring everything up to par. An unqualified audit in the terminology in the auditing world means everything is fine. For many years, Onion Lake has done and provided an unqualified audit to our membership and our people. So we follow those principles. We follow the Canadian accounting auditing principles. We've met those requirements. What is the federal government after? Ultimately, the land set aside for reserves for Indian people is set out in the Royal Proclamation of British North American Act. Even the status Indians. This is part of that. For many of our people, until 1951, we were not afforded the luxury of entering into a relationship with a legal firm. We could not even participate in any voting provincial federal election. Keeping in mind, and I will go back to this, this is very important. When Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta and the Northwest Territories was called Rupert's Land. In 1867, John A. Macdonald did not have this under the dominion of Canada. This is recorded, and our researchers and our staff have identified and found this information. He went to London, England 3 times to ask the Crown if this could be a part of the dominion of Canada. On the 3rd time, the Crown provided royal assent and said, yes, however, you must enter into a treaty with the inhabitants, the Indians, the Red Indian of the land. You must enter into a treaty. This is very, very important. And number 2, you must provide fair, equitable compensation to the Indian for their land. Keyword, their land. They came back and entered into Treaty 1 and subsequently Treaty 11, 1 to 11. They entered into treaty, but the government never provided fair, equitable compensation to our people for our land. This is what the general public does not understand. Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba and Northwest Territories could not ever have been a part of Canada without this treaty. That is very important, and that's what in the provinces came to be in existence in 1905. And this happened in 1870s to enter into Treaty 1. So we were here. No one was allowed, the newcomer was allowed to come to what is called the Western provinces today. Our people had that sovereign inheritance to this land at that time. No one was allowed from the Queen's subjects to come onto this land. We are allies, we are not subjects, we were never conquered. All of this needs to be said out into the public proper. This treaty is a crown relationship. Sovereigns, the definition of sovereign, you must have a land, you must have a people, you must have a culture, and you must have all of these things. We had that, and we still do. When you look at Canada, when you look at the parliamentary process, that's borrowed from the United Kingdom of Great Britain. They do not have their own. We had our systems, and we still have them intact. We never relinquished sovereignty. The treaty, as it states in the written context, keeping in mind our people did not understand the English language at the time of treaty, and they relied on interpreters. Our people's oral understanding, and again I said my teacher and the ceremonies and the ways of our people, his father was there. It says in the written context of treaty to cease, cede, surrender all rights to this land. That is not the understanding of our people. Again, we didn't understand English at that time. The interpreter is the one at that time that said that our people sold the land. We didn't. Because of the relationship to the land, our people call it Mother Earth. And the understanding of our people at that time, and to many of our people today, especially the elders, how can you sell a piece of your mother? We agreed to send, to cohabit and coexist on this land. When the treaty was entered into, it was only the depth of the plow. They said, we want our people to farm. One elder got up and said, see those geese flying in Fort Pitt. This is all oral understanding. Do you want those too? Do you want the fish in the water? Do you want the game on this land? Alexander Morris said, no, that is yours, as it was provided to you by the Great Spirit. Today, that's another sector of our people having to have permits to hunt. When our people, that was a sustenance in their livelihood. Again, that was already intact and in place. Our governance system, our child welfare systems, our justice systems were all intact, everything, our governance. Now we have to follow, since the infamous Indian Act, someone else's laws, someone else's legislation. When our people entered into treaty in good faith, and look at what's happened to our people today. There was no homelessness back then. No one was hungry back then. Everyone cared and shared the land and the people and looked after each other. Today, when you look out into the urban sectors, when you look out in many communities of the state of our people, when is Canada going to realize without the treaty-making process, we would not have what we have? The Alberta government would not have the luxury of the royalties from the resources if there was no treaty entered into. And what happens to our people? Do they have a piece of that? No, they don't. Saskatchewan would not have the thriving economy that it has today without the resources. In the NRT, 1930, the Natural Resource Transfer Agreement that was arbitrarily given by the Canadian government to the provinces, not one of our leaders was provided the opportunity, the duty to consult, or to provide consent to the minerals. Remember, the treaty never said anything under the ground. The minerals, anything under belongs to you, is what the Alexander Morris said to our people in Treaty Number 6. Nobody in 1930 remembered that. Nobody was asked for the 1930 Natural Resource Transfer Agreement, is it okay for us to start exploiting the minerals that belong to you? That was an agreement made by Canada and the provinces. Today, it says, as long as there's no underlying trust, this NRT will be effective. We have a trust, it's called a land trust. It was there in the time of treaty, it's still here today. However, because we did not have the ability to find a lawyer to represent us in 1930, they arbitrarily made these. Many of these I'm sharing today for our people and citizens that are listening today. This is the importance of this, of why we are making a stand on C27. We provide that information to the people. We've got systems in place. And the Governor General has an obligation under the treaty that was entered into the Crown. The public monies, everything that is intact, was intact today as it was yesterday, the day before treaty, amongst our people. There are many violations that we saw in this legislation. Prior to legislation coming into effect, C27, Lake Cree Nation went to our people in a general meeting. We explained this, what is happening to our funding agreements. Do we sign, or do we sign under duress, or do we not sign? After questions and answers, they said at that time, sign the funding under duress, being forced to sign it. A year ago, we went back in March. This time, our membership at the community forum, after 3 days, providing our audits information, said don't sign. I explained the 3 options again, and they said don't sign, so we didn't sign the agreement. And we explained to the people that were in attendance that these monies belong to you that we use. That's why we're here. That's why we're asking for your endorsement. We didn't ask Canada for our capital trust monies. We asked our people because it's their funds. Until Canada can show and demonstrate what they've put in for all the employment and the jobs that we created for our people, and how much resources they provided to Onion Lake, they have an obligation under the CFA funding agreement to provide those audits. So we gave them that audit. This time, the consolidated audit, the rest of the information belongs to the membership of Onion Lake Cree Nation, because it's theirs. That's who we represent, that's who we work for, not the Canadian government. Thank you.
Okay, so I can open the floor to have to realize that now Onion Lake is in litigation, so you may not get whatever answers that you may be seeking, other than what they're only able to say as part of that action.
Is Onion Lake going this alone unilaterally, or are there other bands that are going to be part of this action or considering joining this action? If so, how many?
Again, I can only speak for our people. However, I've got correspondence from other nations that are supporting us in our action. Whether they go, that's their decision, whether they come in and enter into this with us also. But basically, the support from the many nations that have approached and communicated with us, they're supporting us.
And what are you asking? I haven't had a chance to take a look at the statement of claim. What solution are you looking for?
There's an opportunity for Canada to correct the wrongs that have been done to our people since 1876. We have a sovereign relationship with the Crown. We are sovereign people, contrary to what, again, is said the Indian Act.
Is this the big picture that you're going to fight that big a picture in this action?
Yes.
And just, this is clearly not going to be a speedy process. You talked about 800 full-time employees. You're concerned about them, federal government withholding money. What happens with your members in the interim?
Of course, our interest is always for the people of our community. We have taken steps in preparation for this to ensure that nothing is disrupted in regards to the livelihood of our people.
What sort of steps?
That is for us to determine. I'm not at liberty to share that. I will share that with our people.
Sure. Now, speaking of people, you mentioned that they have been given audited financial statements. Members, we heard from one member who says that, in fact, while opposed to C27, he thinks that this case should apply because he says he and others have been trying to get statements found out where the money's going for a long time, and they haven't. What do you say to that?
We've always had an open door policy to any member of Onion Lake to request and come to the information. Of course, and I'm not being disrespectful by saying this, you and I have not been educated in the accounting and financial interpretation of documents. So we've always had an open door for people to come and meet with our financial staff to go over some of that information. Because when you share this information, it's very complicated at times, and how do you interpret this? So their doors are open for them to come and to look at the statements, ask the questions within the office. And it always has been like that.
Any other questions?
I just wondered how much income you rely on the federal government and how much you generate your own. Because you said you supplement, you must have a large.
Because of the statement that we filed today, that is information that may come up as part of our defense, and at liberty, we cannot at liberty to answer that at this time. But the government of Canada knows how much we've always supplemented based on the audit in the past.
Can you say how many businesses the band runs then?
We have a numerous amount of businesses. It's on our website.
Okay. Yeah. And just clarifying for me on the federal part of the funding, you're willing to give them an audit of that part of the money, but not your supplemental part.
Yes,
Is that
because
correct?
that belongs to our membership.
So you can't then say how much you're going to lose today, or can you say, because the deadline triggers?
It's all in the process of, unfortunately, the litigation, the statement that was filed this morning.
If there aren't any other questions, then I thank you for attending the press conference.
Can I just ask you
One more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you hoping to strike down C27 altogether, or?
The statement of claim will sets out what we're doing with that C27. But I want to end off and share this. For the average citizen, the Indian monies, research this as journalists and reporters, the Indian monies program. When the federal government through Treasury Board allocates funding to Indian and Northern Affairs, that is our funding from that Indian Land Trust, Indian monies program. So we're actually paying for the minister's office, all the bureaucrats across Canada from that money. Do the numbers and the percentages. We've done that in the past as part of negotiations, trying to get the federal government to the table. Many other tribes have also tried it, to state that by the time XYZ dollars allocated by Parliament, Treasury Board to Indian Affairs, by the time it reaches the First Nation level, it's a very, very ridiculous amount. The balance of that supplements government employees, pensions, O&M, everything else at Indian and Northern Affairs Canada.
Were you partly upset about, I think you made some reference to dissension about when some of the chiefs' salaries came out under this legislation and caused some controversy?
I'm not upset about that. It's not about chief and council salaries. Like I said, we disclosed that to our people, the ones that are, it's open to all their membership. It's not about chief and council salaries. The whole issue is about jurisdiction and recognizing that we have a right and sovereign relationship under treaty.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming out today. And if there's anything else that you need to ask or we will close the conference now. Thank you.
Thank you.